it's going to kind of depend on what kind of questions you have. But we'll kick the whole thing off in a moment. The chat room is going to be a great way to post questions that you have, and it could really be on anything. John's going to be the co-host today. He's going to help share his opinions and advice. So you might hear like two sides of things from us because we also have different ways that we work and different gear that we're working with. So hopefully that'll be helpful to all of you guys to hear a couple of different ways to do things. So we're going to just hang out for just another minute. We have a smaller group for this today, so that is great. That means you guys get to ask us more questions. So hang on for just a moment and we'll kick this off. Devin, the store is open, limited capacity?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Okay, so hi everybody, my name is Kate Hailey. I work with Glazer's Camera. I run all the events for the store. And during the time that we've been sheltering in place during the COVID-19 outbreak, we have been open but in a very limited capacity, basically for online web orders and curbside pickup only. However, this week we have reopened our doors and are allowing customers in at a limited capacity. So basically, if you want to come in and shop, there's staff on hand to help you. We just have to limit how many people we can have in the store at any given time. And there's a couple other things that when you get here, you'll be advised on. With that in mind, you can still place orders online. You can still do curbside pickup. And our hours are still Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 at this time. So that will continue to shift and evolve as we continue to expand back into more normal operations. For today's session, we're going to just do a general photography Q&A. Hopefully all of you guys know already that we are doing PhotoFest virtually this year. This year marks the 11th year for the PhotoFest event, and traditionally that's always over a Saturday, Sunday with tons of programming where you could go from this class to that class and just learn a whole bunch of stuff. But with the COVID-19 situation, we had to make a shift. So what we're doing is we're offering 8 days of free online sessions like this with ambassadors from different brands like Sigma, Tamron, Canon, Fujifilm, who else? Nikon, all the brands, not all the brands, but many of them. So we have brand ambassadors from a lot of those brands. We're also gonna have tech reps on for some sessions. And we're going to talk about everything from wedding photography and elopement photography to how to create, do lighting setups for video interviews and a lot more. So go to glazerspphotofest.com to see the schedule. Please register for that event and let us know what classes you're interested in, because those who register are going to get some special offers that are only available to those who register. So many of you know PhotoFest is our biggest sale of the year. And we work with a lot of vendors to make a lot of the best deals happen. And we've done that again this year. It's just going to be in a little bit of a different way. So be sure to register and look for those emails during the event. But it kicks off on Saturday at 10 a.m. I'll be your host throughout the whole week. And we'll have, like I said, multiple sessions, 5 sessions on Saturday. And it's just going to have anywhere from 2 to 5 sessions a day from June 13th to June 20th. So check that out, glazerspphotofest.com. And then from here, we're going to just kick this off. When we were coming up, I've been spending all my time programming PhotoFest, and I was like, hey, let's do a quick Q&A as we go into that event, because we've been trying to be in front of the community during this whole time. And so that was kind of why I wanted to put this session together today. With that in mind, I want to introduce John Cornicello, who's
Hello.
Here. Many of you in the Seattle area know John. He is a fantastic portrait photographer. He is a lighting expert, and just has a really great wealth of knowledge in his brain. And the great thing about the combination of me and John is we have 2 different approaches to how we photograph and how we approach lighting and those conversations around lighting and photography in general. So it's a great opportunity for you guys to kind of hear those different approaches and get some new ideas for things. This is really a Q&A session. This is intended to be a conversation about photography. So I would love for you guys to post questions in the chat room. If you want to unmute your mics and ask those with your voices, that's great too. with that in mind, if you guys are a little shy to start, I had put together a couple of things. I went on my Instagram account yesterday and asked people to share some questions that they had. And so I have those in my notes over here. And I also have some slides that I thought we could talk about, because even though the city is starting to open up and the state is starting to open up, we're still kind of probably going to be working from home more than we used to, and we'll still be kind of spending more time at home as opposed to going out and doing things. You know, over time, that's going to get easier. But I have some like tips for being creative when you're kind of stuck at home. So I'm happy to share that as well. But the first thing I want to do is just let John just take a moment to kind of introduce himself and talk about his work. And then if you guys have questions, please start populating those in the chat room. And we'll just see where this goes. We're scheduled to go until about 1 today, and then we'll wrap it up with any final Q&A at that time. So John, just take a moment to tell people
Sure.
about you and your work.
Sure. I'm a local photographer and educator. I've been mostly a portrait photographer until March. I haven't done anything since March except go out and steal the souls of flowers in the neighborhood. So I'm pretty well versed with macro, with studio lighting. Yeah, just about anything you want to talk about, I can find out the answer for you. I've got good resources and the like. You may have seen me on Creative Live, moving lights around in the background. Also worked for Adobe for 20 years, so got a variety of background experience. So looking forward to chatting with people today.
Yeah, and I actually, half the questions that came in through my Instagram post are about photo editing. So we'll definitely dig into that a little bit today.
Okay.
But we have our first question in the chat room, and that is coming from Stuart. And he's asking, what's the single most important thing you did to improve your photography skills, other than spend thousands of dollars on equipment and training? And please don't say take a lot of pictures. And I'm kind of working through trial and error. So I am going to say take a lot of pictures because that is a thing that helped me. One of the most important things that I've done in the past 12 years to help my photography, and this is going to sound crazy, but it's true. I did a 365 project, all shot on an iPhone, a photo a day, every day for a year, captured on an iPhone, edited on an iPhone, shared to Instagram and Flickr at the time, because I started doing that in 2010. And what I did with that project was by creating an image every day, and sometimes it was a photo of my dinner, and it wasn't always a great photo of my dinner, but by kind of getting into that practice to kind of trying to create something every day, pushed me to be better, because I was focused on, especially in just using a phone, I was focused on light, composition, and story, and worried a little bit less about the gear. And I found in 4 years of doing those projects, those things helped me become a better photographer. So I know you don't want to hear take a lot of pictures, but don't take a lot of pictures. Take more pictures with intention. What are you trying to say? What is the story that you're trying to share? Slow down a little bit when you're taking those photos. You know, be very intentional with your composition, with your light. Experiment, try different things. That's one of the things that helped me. You know, over the past 11 years, I've taken over 100,000 photos with an iPhone, 100,000 not so great photos, and probably 1,000 photos I'm really proud of. So there's still going to be that trial and error. You're still going to make mistakes, but it's through those mistakes that you can learn and get better. So I'll let John chime in on his advice there
there's
too.
the Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours or 10,000 photos, but now with the digital camera, you can do those 10,000 photos in one weekend and get all caught up. But really, my advice is take advantage of all the online education there is. When I was coming up, no one talked about how they did things or gave their secrets away. Now everyone does. I mean, you can learn studio lighting stuff in a month or two that might have taken some of us years to learn, just because the resources are out there now. So take advantage of the resources.
All right. So does anybody else have any other questions that are on their mind right now? And you can unmute your mics and share those questions with your voice if you want. Okay. Well, I'm going to kind of dive into a couple of the questions that I did receive via Instagram. And one of them, and I know John will have great advice on this too, but I'll share kind of my advice on that too, is one person asked me about posing people. Tips and techniques for people who are uncomfortable in front of the camera. And I'll lead that off with I'm uncomfortable in front of the camera. I just always have been. So that's an issue that I'm slowly working on. The fact that I'm here today and have been hosting these sessions and these kinds of sessions off and on for a long time is a barrier that I kind of like jump over. The first piece of advice I can give on working with people who are uncomfortable in being in front of the camera is to have a conversation with them, get to know them. For me, creating a portrait of someone is not just snapping the shutter and setting up some lights. I'm building a relationship with that person that I'm photographing. And through a conversation, through getting to know them, over time, I'm able to build their trust. And that trust is really where those magical moments and those portraits really kind of shine, if that makes sense. John, what?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your advice there.
I'm sort of the odd photographer that's happy on either side of a camera, and I think that really helps getting yourself on the other side of the camera as often as you can. But it is about the relationship and making people comfortable. If you want them to do a pose, demonstrate for them. Be ready to make a fool of yourself. Let it become a fun session. Yeah, it's just try the poses yourself. Don't try to put someone into a pose that you think is going to work, and you don't even know if anyone can actually do it. But it's conversation, relaxing with them. Someone mentioned in the comments of Canon R5, the mirrorless. I just want to talk about mirrorless in general. I've been using mine sort of like I used to use a view camera, where I can stand next to the camera and actually converse with the person instead of being stuck behind the camera and my voice going into the back of it. So I can talk to the people, interact with them, have a conversation, and just take pictures as they get more and more relaxed and comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I use mirrorless for all of my photo shoots. So I'm not using the R5. That's not out yet, I don't believe. But I know it's been announced and a lot of people are excited about it. So let's see. So what are our thoughts about moving away from the DSLR format to mirrorless camera formats?
You've done it.
John is asking, hang on just 1 second, John.
Yeah.
Let me finish asking that question here. So John Shields is saying he hasn't seen the performance in the mirrorless system that the 5D Mark IV has, at least for a very low light, high ISO performance. Well, I can say that the Fujifilm X-T4, I had the opportunity to work with that and the X100V. The low light performance on those cameras is fantastic. I personally only shoot mirrorless for my pro work, and I love it. I have a great experience with my cameras. I use all Fujifilm cameras myself, but I also have had access to using Canon mirrorless, Sony mirrorless. There's really a lot of great options out there. If you're super curious about adding a mirrorless camera to your setup, or just wanting to see the capabilities of them, I would suggest renting one, especially maybe one of the newer Sonys that has, a bit more range, or even look at the medium format Fujis. For not much more money than something like a 5D Mark IV, you can actually get a medium format camera that weighs about the same, that has really great output and a bigger sensor. So there's a lot of options out there for you. Renting would definitely be a suggestion that I have. But for me and the work that I do on a regular basis, the Fujifilm cameras are working great for me. I know John shoots Canon, and I think, John, have you been using more of the mirrorless options lately?
Yeah, last June I bought the EOS R thinking it'd be just kind of a secondary camera. But by September, it's probably switched to the only camera I've been using. I moved from a 5D Mark III to the R, and I haven't noticed any issues with low light. The camera sees in the dark. I mean, a lot of the mirrorless do. It's amazing for focusing and the like. So yeah, I've been extremely happy with the EOS R.
Yeah, there's just a lot of great options out there now. I think 5 or 7 years ago, people were they weren't sure about mirrorless, but I mean, everyone is making really great mirrorless cameras. So I would highly recommend renting maybe 1 or 2 models that you're potentially interested in. And the rental shop is open again too for curbside pickup. So that's something to consider. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm reading questions super quick. So Lewis is asking, going back to when I was talking about taking more meaningful photos, so he would like for me to elaborate a little bit more on that, and how to express something through a photo. So for that, what I want to do is I'm going to pull up a slideshow and share my screen with you guys and show you some photos, and hopefully this will help a little bit. So I'm going to do this. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to open Keynote. And so this is going to be silly. So I put this presentation together a few weeks ago when I did a session on just kind of being creative when you're stuck at home. And it's got like this really broad selection of images in it. But what I want to do is share just a couple of things that will talk about mood and intention. So this is a simple loaf of bread. It's a loaf of bread. Not the most interesting thing in the world, right? But when I got this loaf of bread at a local bakery here in Seattle, they sliced it for me. And when I got it home, the first thing I wanted to do was take a photo of it because I wanted to tag them in support of trying to help local businesses when so many people have had to close their doors during all of the stay-at-home orders. So they sliced the loaf for me. I pulled it out of the bag. I tried to put it back together as much as I could, but then there's those slices that are just kind of laying there. And it's not the best photo in the world, but it gives you kind of a sense of home. I'm looking at the light. The light is coming in from this great window that I have in my apartment, and the light is kind of like off to the side, so it's casting an interesting shadow on the other side. And this is just shot with a phone. I'm using the portrait mode on an iPhone, so it's helping me get that shallow depth of field, which is blurring out the background that's a little bit messy. And I'm okay with that being a little bit messy because it does, again, give me that sense of, oh, this was shot at home. You know, it could be like a loaf of bread I baked, but I didn't bake it. But I just wanted to do a quick shot of something so simple as a loaf of bread. You know, another thing to consider is something like this. So someone had asked me on Instagram about street photography and tips on street photography. And I love this shot. I shot this several years ago at Pike Place Market, and it's busy with people and there's all this action and there's this guy playing piano. And as he's playing piano, he's moving in and out of the shot. And I stood there for probably 5 or 10 minutes and listened to him and watched him, and I took several photos. But this was the winner because of him coming into the light at the right moment, and I happened to capture that. So when I think about intention, mood, or story, in this case, I'm freezing action. He's got an interesting, unusual expression on his face. There's this interesting light on him, but there's all this like craziness over here, and this seems like a somewhat calm moment. So to me, I'm also looking at that balance of calm and craziness and chaos. And then the thing that I fell in love with later in this photo was that little kid on the other side of the piano. I never really noticed him until I looked at this in a presentation I was doing, and the photo was like as big as a wall. And I was like, I never noticed that kid's expression before. It's also just completely different and completely unengaged. So when I think about intention, I think about like slowing down a little bit and taking moments and finding moments and waiting for moments, especially with street photography. So John, I'm going to stop screen sharing and just see if you had.
Well, I just happened to be reading a new book by Rick Salmon called Photo Quest. And,
oh yeah, I saw him posting about that.
Yeah, and it's a photo book that has no photos in it. It's stories with a bunch of photographers and ways of building some intention and things like that.
Yeah,
that's
so
it.
That's his, what, 40th book or something?
It's 41st book.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'm struggling to just get one book finished right now.
Anyway, I've been enjoying that.
I just think like slowing down, taking time, think thoughtfully about your composition, the story that you want to tell, the story that you want to share with other people. Those are the things you want to consider. Slowing down is really important. Hopefully that was helpful to you, Lewis. Mark is asking about blurry photos. He says his shutter speed's high enough, so there shouldn't be camera shake. The image looks clear in your viewfinder. So there could be a couple of things that are happening there. What I'd recommend is looking at a couple of those photos on your computer and just take a deep look at those settings. The thing with the screens on our cameras is that the photo is small. So you could think that that photo is in focus when you shot it, but then when you get it home and look at it on the screen, it's out of focus. Prime example, I did this portrait shoot on location a few years ago, and my favorite shot, I missed the target focus point, and his eyes were not in focus, the background was in focus. And I even looked at it on the screen, I was like, oh, I nailed it. And then I looked at it after I was home and I was like, oh, failed it. So take a look. There's another thing that could be at play. Sometimes you need to calibrate your lenses. So you might have the focus point on the eye, but the lens could be calibrated for like a slightly different point. And you might need to look into that. So that's not actually something I've had to do with my lenses, but I know people have had to like calibrate their lenses to help with that. So John, do you have any other tips for that?
I've never had to calibrate lenses either. I know people talk about it all the time, but I've been lucky there. I guess I would ask what aperture you're working at. If you're working with a fast lens, and is it a mirrorless or a DSLR? If it's a DSLR and you're working at a lens faster than, if you're at an aperture faster than 2.8, it just could be that you can't tell what's in focus on the focusing screen, because the focusing screen simulates an aperture depth of field of 2.8 to f4. So wider than that, you really can't tell in the camera. And again, also, what other shutter speed you're using, and can you do you have a tripod? Can you do a test? Put the camera on a tripod, take the picture, then take the same picture off the tripod, and just to confirm on that. And if you're working on a tripod, make sure your image stabilization is turned off. I know some of the newer cameras can sense they're on a tripod and will turn the IS off, but some older ones don't do that.
Sometimes that image stabilization is on your lenses and not in your camera. So some cameras have it built in, some you can't even override, but that is something to consider. So those are great tips, John. Does anybody else have any other questions? I know I have a few in my little queue over here about editing, but maybe I can talk a little bit about that and let you guys ask a few more questions in the chat room. So this is always a loaded question. So the first question I got on editing was, which program do I prefer, Photoshop or Lightroom? And I will say yes. I use more than Photoshop or Lightroom. I pick my editing program depending on how I'm going to use the photos, which may sound crazy, but for some of my sessions, I use Capture One a lot actually. For any of my portrait sessions, anything for my clients, I am often either shooting tethered directly into Capture One or using Capture One for the editing of my files. For day-to-day work, I use Lightroom the most. Lightroom is a great way to get started in editing. It's a great cataloging software. I love being able to search for keywords, rating my photos, and having that combination. And it's got like pretty much, for the most part, any editing tool you'd need. So if you're trying to get started in editing, I would definitely look at Lightroom first. Photoshop is a fantastic editor, but it is better when you need to do more. So for instance, if you're gonna retouch a photo, say you're doing high-end editorial fashion photography, you might start in Capture One and do your basic edits and then go to Photoshop for retouching. Or you could even start in Lightroom and then go to Photoshop for retouching. So I think about Photoshop when I need to do more. Lightroom does have some limitations, especially if you're gonna do things like retouching. You can do a little retouching, but really Photoshop is a better tool for that. And I also do like playing with the color tools that are available in Photoshop and Capture One. Lightroom has some color tools where you can kind of manipulate the shades and tones, but definitely Photoshop and Capture One are a bit more robust for those options. I have tried Luminar 3. I haven't used the new Luminar yet. Someone's asking about Luminar 4. I hope to try that. I also use On One, and I also use Exposure X5. So there's a lot of options. And Exposure, which used to be from a company called Alien Skin, but they just rebranded to be called Exposure, That one is great if you want to do some more creative edits. They have all these awesome film simulations and textures that you can add and things like that. So if I'm working with images that I maybe shot with a lens baby or that are going to be a more artistic, I normally use Exposure V5 for that. And it's just a lot of fun. The cool thing about something like Capture One or Luminar or Exposure is that you have the option to just buy it and you don't have to do a subscription. Capture One does offer a subscription or buy it, and then Adobe is full-on subscription. So that's another consideration too. And those software programs cost anywhere from $50 to start to a couple $100. Capture One's probably the most expensive as a flat rate, but it's a really great program. So I'm going to let John talk. I know John uses Lightroom a lot, probably dabbles in Photoshop too. But John, do you have any other things that you would
Yeah,
add
I
to
mean, until
that
recently, I used
comparison?
to say that if I couldn't finish my photo in Lightroom, I failed as a photographer. If I needed to open Photoshop, but I've come around to my thinking because I'll open Photoshop to do textures and layers and heavy duty retouching. I've also started using Topaz Impression, which simulates paintings quite a
Oh,
bit the
nice.
past couple of weeks, which is something I didn't think I would do. I did recently get Luminar 4. I haven't really had a chance to dive into it yet. I still got to go through some tutorials. I know it has this new portrait mode in there, and I haven't figured out how to get that going yet.
Is
I
that for
just
like
need time to
retouching
sit
portraits?
down with it. But I've been really impressed with the Topaz impressions. It's almost a pun there.
Yeah, I mean, there's
But yeah,
just so many
Lightroom is
options
my
on the
main.
market, and which is actually great because one thing that can do is that can kind of help the programs that we go to, like Adobe, uh, do more, push it harder, give us more options, or encourage them to give us more options. But I just, like I said at the beginning, I think about how I'm going to use a photo, where I'm going to put that photo, what's the output going to be, and then I use the program that's best suited for that. So, like, John's talking about the Topaz Impressions. Is that what it was called?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I love creating painterly looks. There's a couple of apps I use on my phone that help me do that, but it sounds like that would be an interesting program to check out too. So, there's so many great options on the market. So, what I can close that out with is, to me, it's not a difference of Photoshop over Lightroom. It's really Lightroom and Photoshop. Um, because, like even John was saying, like, I know John always uses Lightroom, 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 but you kind of, there's some things that you can do a little bit of in Lightroom, but in Photoshop you can get deeper and do more. And it's very easy to spend like an hour doing something in Photoshop because you can kind of get lost in that world. um, so let's see here. Let's see. So what programs do you recommend for landscape shots or film work? Honestly, any of the programs that we have mentioned. For a lot of the landscape photography, for me, I typically will use Lightroom for most of it because most of my travel work is probably basic edits are done in Lightroom. And then I even will retouch photos that I've done in the desert or things like that to clean up the sand, which sounds crazy, but I've started to kind of look at those kinds of details on my images. I think Luminar could potentially be interesting for some of the landscape stuff. And honestly, Exposure would be another great one to look at. So if you're not wanting to go down the path of Adobe, Exposure or Luminar, most of these companies also have a 30-day free trial. So you can download the trial, play around with it, see if it's going to work for you and how you want to work and what you want to do, and then decide if you want to buy it or not. So unfortunately, Adobe only has a 7-day trial, which is not long enough in my opinion. For film photography, I would, look again at those same programs. The cool thing about a program like Lightroom is it will actually let you add keywords and things like that. So if you, when I shoot film, if I shoot like Fujifilm Acros 100, I can add that as a keyword. So I can search my entire catalog for that keyword and find images shot with that film. So there's a lot of things that you can do with that. John, you do a little bit of landscapes. Do you have any other, like, what would your
I
go-to
was gonna
program be for editing landscapes?
I was gonna say I don't really do much in the way of landscape, so it sticks with the same Lightroom, do black and white conversions, and I haven't shot film in a long time, so I'm interested in whether or rather Pete, is scanning his own with negs or how you're getting the film into the computer to work with.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So Pete, if you want to let us know if you're scanning those images yourself, or are you having your lab do that? I know the last few rolls I've done, I just have the lab do it for me because I don't have a scanner anymore. But basically, even with my scans, I'll just pull them into Lightroom. I don't do a ton of like editing on my scanned film shots because typically there doesn't need to be. But yeah, that's kind of going to be my flow too. Is I would start in Lightroom most likely. One other question I had received was how not to over edit your work, and I think for me, editing has evolved over time. When you first get into a program, say like Exposure or even Lightroom, you get excited because there's presets and you can hit a preset and then you can do customizations to that preset and you can play with those sliders and push them one way and the other way and you can just go to town. And I think most people I know, or a lot of people I know rather, when we start with those, we go crazy and we have fun with it. And we're adding vignettes and we're making the colors crazy and adding tons of saturation. Over time, it's going to evolve. Over time, you're going to do a little bit less of that. When I think about editing an image, I think about trying to push the color and the quality to make it look the way that it looked when I was standing there. Our cameras can capture so much information, but they can't always see exactly what I'm seeing because while the dynamic range in our cameras is awesome, it still can't see every element that the eye can see. It can't see all of the detail in the shadow. It can't see all of the detail in the highlights. It doesn't always get the colors quite right. So really my goal with editing is to try and get those colors closer to what I saw when I was standing there. Sometimes tweaking it a little bit more. That's kind of my starting point. John, do you want to talk about that yourself a little bit? Like, because your work doesn't really look edited necessarily, and like you said, your goal, get it in camera, and then if you have to do much more, that it's a little retouching, maybe a black and white conversion. I feel like we're kind of in that same camp. We want the
Yeah,
photo
I
to
think
look the way that we took it and we saw it.
yeah, some of the issue for over processing is usually over sharpening or a little too much contrast, or I forgot what this setting is in Lightroom, but it's over usually the sharpening. You know, you can edit all you want as long as I can't see the edits. It's like HDR. I don't like HDR unless I don't know it's HDR.
Well, and that's my approach to HDR too. I I don't do a ton of HDR, but when I do, I want it to look. The goal with
Natural.
HDR for me is to capture that more information in the shadow and the more information in the highlights and the midtones that I'm seeing, but a camera can't see in a single shot. You know, like you said, fewer, less sharpening and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that might lead into Lewis's next question too.
So, okay. So, do we have any tips on posting photos to social media to avoid cropping, resizing, or losing quality? So, anytime you upload a photo to Instagram or Facebook, it's going to optimize it to be viewed on basically a device, and it will downsize it typically, unless you're exporting it to fit the exact dimensions that they share. So there's also a compression thing that happens. So a lot of times if you post a photo on Facebook, it won't look the way that it looked on your monitor. And you might be able to notice that. The everyday person probably won't be able to notice that. One thing that I often do is I'll put it on my website. If I really want people to experience the photo in the best way possible, I'll put it on my website and share a link to that photo. That's gonna be one thing that I think about. Let's see. For cropping and resizing, some people will take that photo and put it into an app and add a border around it that's maybe white or black so that you can see the full image. But the best thing to do for me is I just tap, in Instagram especially, I just tap that little icon in the bottom left corner so it doesn't get resized. So it shows it the way that I want it to be seen, if that makes sense. John, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I do a lot to my photos for this. If it's going to Facebook, I resize it to either 720, 960, or 2048 pixels on the long side. Compression level of around 75 of my JPEG. If it's going out to Instagram, 1080 wide or tall, I do have an export preset in Lightroom that will take tall ones and put black borders on either side so it fits a square on the screen. Um, and that's, again, yeah, the 1080 is the maximum there. A lot of times if I'm doing editing specifically for online, I won't edit at the full resolution, at 6,000 pixels. I may size it down to 2,400 or 2,000 pixels, do the edits there, so it's already at a smaller size, and there isn't that much of a difference with it going into the online systems. I find video is worse on Facebook. If I do a video for Facebook, it's usually going to look really bad no matter what I do to it. But photos, I think I've been pretty lucky on getting them to work pretty well on both Instagram and Facebook.
All right, I am checking one more thing. So John, I'm going to ask you this. I might have to ask Devin. Devin, so Devin is in the background over here, making all the things happen, and
forgetting to switch cameras.
Forgetting to switch cameras. That's okay. But what scanner would we recommend for scanning film? The V800 from Epson? Is it a V800 or 700?
Okay, so
Okay, here we go, guys.
there's dedicated film scanners. I should get my own microphone on the switchboard
Yeah.
here.
So there's dedicated film scanners.
Yes, and those are going to be the best because you don't have to calibrate the height. Because flatbed scanners are going to need a little bit of finessing when it comes to actually like optimizing the scan, whereas we have dedicated scanners by Tech, or we have a dedicated scanner by Tech that offers,
That you would load in the roll, and
Yep.
it takes up less space on your table, but it would also give you higher res scans too, wouldn't it? Potentially?
Yes, in that it doesn't have to calibrate, so they'd be as sharp as possible. The only downside is that it's not medium format. We only have the 35 mil version.
Okay. So I know, is the V800 the most recent from Epson?
V800, V850.
Okay.
There's also the V600 for up to medium format, no
Okay.
large format.
So if you're doing a 35 millimeter or medium format film, so 120 size, you might look at the Epson V650, V600, V800, or V850. Those are all flatbed scanner. So they do take up more real estate on your desk area, but they are pretty easy to get up and running. And if you need something a bit more robust and you're just doing 35, we have an option from Tech. So feel free to call the store or email us and ask us, and we can help you with some more details on those. So we got a little bit of time left. So someone's asking about basic lighting tools for the most economical and efficient way to improve portraits: flashes, softboxes, reflectors. So boy, did you ask the right two people that question. So I'm going to kick it off with just a few tools that are my go-to tools. And then John, because John actually uses mostly studio lights, but uses speed lights on occasions. I use speed lights a lot. And right now, my go-to setup is the Godox 850 V2. I think that's the right model number. Basically, it's the most expensive regular looking speed light, but it's got a rechargeable battery, which means I'm not burning through AA batteries a lot. And their remote system, you can plug in, you can use their system with any camera basically. You just get the right controller for whatever camera brand you're shooting. Speed lights are a great way to get started because they're relatively inexpensive, they're super portable, and there's a lot of great modifiers that you can put a speed light into and be able to have great light on your subject. So even the light that we have here in a room, there's a big octabox, okay? This is a continuous light that we're using today, obviously. But you can get like big softboxes. My go-to brand is Westcott. There's an Apollo line from them that has a square softbox that's 28 inches, and then an orb, which is 43 inches. And the orb is kind of my go-to for portraits where I want broader, softer light. And then I also love the beauty dish from them when I'm doing, when I'm working with models and want more of a beauty look. There's a couple of beauty dish options from Westcott that are really great. there's this, it's called the switch system, and basically you can plug an adapter and connect their softboxes into any lights that you want to use. But I love the Joel Grimes Beauty Dish. I use that with my speed lights, and also with the new FJ400, which is a studio light from Westcott. And that's a 400-watt strobe. So it really kind of depends on what your budget is, how much light you need, and what you kind of want to make happen. For me, I primarily do headshots and portraits, some editorial work. So I can combine a speed light with like an FJ400 and have a 2 or 3 light setup, because I have a couple of speed lights and different kind of modifiers. But my absolute go-to setup starts with typically a Godox speed light and either the Westcott 43-inch orb for a bigger, rounder light source, trying to emulate that window light a little bit more, or the Beauty Dish, which is a bit smaller around, and just helps create a little bit more different dramatic light. I also love the reflectors from Westcott. I have 4 or 5 of them now. I get the 5-in-1 reflector. That gives me the option to have silver, white, silver gold mix, black, or a diffusion panel. So depending on what my goals are, I can add silver to add a lot of light as a fill, or I can use white to add a little bit of a softer light. I tend to go to the white reflector first because it is softer, it looks a bit more natural. But if it's more editorial, I love to throw that silver in there and get it to look a little bit more contrasty, a little bit more interesting. So those are some of my go-tos. John, tell us your go-tos.
Okay,
Your
well, I
favorite
see
light?
economical and efficient there. So the first thing I would go for is an umbrella.
Okay.
Umbrellas get short shrift these days, but for many years, many of the top portrait fashion photographers all made really great images with umbrellas. So even if you have get it off camera, of course. Speed light is fine. Start with like a 42-inch umbrella, and you can do great things with a person to up to a group of 4 or 5 with that one umbrella. So there's your efficiency and being economical. How to improve? I mean, if you can move up to a strobe type light that has a modeling light in it, that's great too. I mean, the Godox flash sounds great because it's. Do you know what the price is on that, Kate?
I think it's like 160 or something.
Yeah, so
But it's
that's
the top
great.
of the line in that
Right.
size. There's, I think, 5 or 6 different versions of speedlights that we have from them. And some of them are teeny tiny. But what I like about the V860, and I'm pretty sure I got the model number right. I get all the numbers confused, honestly. But I just got a thumbs up from Devin, so I did get the number right. But what I love about it is the rechargeable battery. So that means I can go through, I mean, I've done probably 3 or 4 shoots in a week and not had to even put that battery on a charger. And now I'm not using it at full power, but you can get, I think, hundreds of fires off that rechargeable battery if you're using it even at full power. It just is really nice to not have to worry about batteries dying on me during a session. And the price point is nice, and it's been pretty robust. So, and it
Yeah,
fits
I was
in
going
any
to
of my
say,
modifiers that I
in
have.
the past, speed light, the top end speed lights were $600-700.
Exactly.
You know, that's crazy. I mean, I know
Yeah.
we're talking for a store here, but still, if you can get the Godox, if you're going to go with a Nikon SB or a Canon 600 or so, I'd consider then a strobe like the Westcott in its place for the same price. It's a lot more versatile.
Yeah, I mean, for the cost
It's important
of,
how.
and I mean, it depends on what your budget is. You know, Profoto also makes a great portable studio light, the A1, the A1X. It is more expensive, but the battery is more robust. You get a lot more fires, and the light output from it is round instead of rectangular. And some people like that because it's a more natural way for light to be coming at you. But there's a lot of options. I just went for Godox because it was easier for me to add into my existing setup. I actually still have a couple of old Nikon speedlights that are 10 and 12 years old that still work, even though I use Fuji cameras. But I have Pocket Wizard remotes that let me talk to everything, so it all works.
Yeah,
But
there's
yeah, I
a place
hope-
that Kate and I disagree a bit. I like rectangular lights. I think of windows and doorways and skylights and big open sky. Very rarely do we get lit with a round light. Even though the sun is around, it's so far away, we're being lit by the whole sky. So it's just a difference of opinion.
In my defense, my favorite Westcott modify for years has been the square Apollo softbox. I have always loved that thing.
And I have the Apollo orb, so, we
Yeah,
all do
I
it
have that
both
too.
ways.
I have that too. I just,
Yeah.
options are good. And when you think about the softbox and that kind of thing, a lot of people make their decision on what type of box they want to use, depending on how they want their catch lights to look in the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at how the light is going to fall. So
Yeah,
for
but
pretty
back to
much every
Stuart's
headshot
question.
session, I use the beauty dish now. So that's kind of my go-to now.
Yeah, but for Stuart to get started, an umbrella, an off-camera flash, and a reflector, and a couple of light stands. And you can
And
do
then
that for
some
pretty
way
cheap.
for that flash to receive the signal. So if you go Godox or Nikon or Canon or whatever brand, you need to get a transmitter and receiver combo. If you go Godox, it's got the receiver built into the flash, so you just have to buy like a little triggering system. And that lets you take it off the camera. As soon as you take it off the camera, you have so much more control and creative options. When it's on the camera looking at someone directly like that, it's not the best light for them. So once you can take it off camera, you can put it here, you can put it here, you can put it here, like you can get more creative and have fun. So keep those questions coming. Let's see, I'm gonna let John take the lead on this one. So if you're just starting out and looking to take a leap from avid photography lover to going pro, how would you make it happen?
That's a tough one. I mean, until
Exactly.
last year, I'd say just do it. This year, it's like everyone I know is struggling. I mean, no one's hiring photographers right now, and photographers don't know where they can work and when. I would say hold off for a little while and figure out where the industry's going. Enjoy it as a hobby if you can. Once you're into the business and you're out there trying to make a hustle for the sales and the like, this environment is just going to be really tough on you. But start slowly. Don't quit your day job.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, if
right
you're
now,
still
I don't know.
working-
Yeah,
Sorry,
I mean,
John.
a few months ago, I would have had very different answers. Right now, I'm really not sure what to tell you.
Yeah, we're still in the midst of people sheltering in place. I also freelance and I teach workshops, so I kind of diversify my work and how I make my money. But during this time, I haven't had a session since John was talking about in March. My last session was late February. I had one scheduled in May, but we had to shift it because we still really couldn't do that. So we're now starting to reopen and be able to schedule things like sessions, but people still can't get haircuts. So I'm a portrait and headshot photographer. No one wants to get a headshot when they haven't been able to get a haircut yet. So
I haven't cut
I
my
don't
hair in
want to
20 years.
downplay the situation that we've all been in. It's been very important for us to stay safe and stay healthy. But these are considerations. If you're thinking about trying to go pro right now, get your ducks in a row. But if you have a job where you're making money, like keep doing that job, save up your money, but get things going on the backside. Like get your website up and running, get your Instagram up and running, get like the marketing tools in place. What kind of work do you want to create? Who's your client? Who are the other photographers in your area? What's your rate going to be? Like start thinking about the business side of things. Get your business license, find an attorney, find an accountant, a CPA.
Accountant.
Those are things that you could start to do to at least get some of the business side of things going while you're still hopefully working, okay? Let's see.
Yeah, I had 12 cancellations the second week of March.
Well, I had to cancel
and
every
nothing-
workshop that I
Yeah,
had booked for
yeah.
3 months. And I had cancellations. And then I had one person book, and actually we moved the session 3 times so far because we're just trying to make sure that everybody's safe. And the second move
Yeah,
was
and-
because nobody could get their hair done.
Right, and go look at Governor Inslee's, a couple of weeks ago, one of his papers was on photography stuff and all the things you're going to have to do with sanitation and
Right.
cleanups and how many people can be in the studio at the same time. I mean, I'm pretty much looking at retiring from shooting headshots and stuff like that now and going almost all into education. I'll still work with some friends that need photos for things, but I think education is going to be my way of going from here out.
Yeah, I hear that. I'm not retiring from shooting though. I love creating portraits, and so now I'm just trying to sort out relaunching my business and also putting into place, the guidelines that the governor has set in motion for, the rules that we have to follow. The store has rules it has to follow. As a photographer, any business owner has to follow those rules as we're kind of going through this. So keep that in mind as well. So I did get one more question, which someone asked me one-on-one. This didn't go to the general chat. Going back to the lighting conversation real quick, do you recommend an off-camera flash attachment? So the piece that attaches the flash to, say, a light stand. And that actually brings up a good point. If you're thinking about getting into adding light to your work and you want to take it off camera, I think, John, you mentioned an umbrella. You probably mentioned a light stand and I didn't hear it. But there's a thing that goes in between, and there's a couple of brands out there.
Tilter bracket.
Huh?
It's called a tilter bracket.
Tilter bracket. I call them umbrella brackets. Everybody's got a different name for them. But there's a brand here that the store has that is kind of my go-to, and they're made by Photix, P-H-O-T-T-I-X, and they come in 3 sizes. My favorite has become the small one because it's got a smaller footprint in my camera bag, and it does everything I need it to do. But it attaches to the light stand, and it will tilt if you want to add an angle to your light, which often is a thing that we do want to do. It will hold an umbrella. It will hold any of the modifiers that we've talked about today, but it also gives you a foot to hold the flash. So it's basically that go-between with the stand, the flash, some kind of modifier, and it'll hold it. So Photix, if you call the store and ask them, they'll tell you and help you get that item. The other thing I wanted to mention that we didn't talk before about with modifiers is MagMod. MagMod makes these awesome things. They attach to the front of your flash, and I tend to use them for key light, hair lights, or more dramatic lighting, and they're just a lot of fun to use. They have a gel kit, they have a grid kit. If you're doing event photography, they have like this little dome that you can use to soften the light so it just looks a little bit better on your clients. So MagMod would be another brand for modifiers if you're thinking about that. They really provide a different look than something like an umbrella or a softbox would, but it's a great thing to pair up with an umbrella or softbox. So you could think about adding a hair light with a gel and adding some color to a shot, or a CTO to make it warm. So there's so many options. Both John and I teach on this subject regularly. So hopefully in the coming months, we'll get to have some of those kind of lighting demos again. All right, so we have just a few minutes left. I have one more question in my queue, but I want to see if anybody else has any questions here in the chat room. So please let us know if you do. Let's see. Oh, okay. So the last question I'm going to leave us with is about Instagram and social media. So someone asked me about the best way to build your Instagram account to be fun while also connecting with others in the community. So the first thing that I want you to consider, and this is from my experience, is if you want to grow an audience, honestly, it's a really hard thing to do now. I've been on Instagram since December of 2010. Instagram started October of 2010, which is kind of crazy to think about being on that platform for almost 10 years. And in that time, it's shifted a lot. My audience is still fairly small. It's hard to kind of keep that going. So the first tips that I can provide you guys, if you want to think about growing your Instagram accounts, increasing your following, is post continuously, like post regularly. Make a little schedule and try and post something daily, or at least Monday through Friday, and consistency in those posts. My biggest problem is I love creating portraits of people and I love traveling. So I go through phases where I'll do a series of portraits and then I'll go through and post some travel photos. I haven't been able to do either of those things for 3 months now. So I'm now faced with, I'm going through the archives soon and I'm gonna just start posting some travel shots because I've been talking to a lot of people about travel lately. So I'm gonna go through my archives of traveling and start sharing some of those photos and those stories. Think about the stories you wanna tell. Using hashtags can be beneficial, but use hashtags that are really appropriate to the image that you're sharing and the goal or the story of that image. The other thing to consider too is tagging brands like Glazer's. Say you bought your camera at Glazer's, or you attended a photo walk that we've done with Glazers. Tagging Glazers shows up in Glazer's feed, and Glazers does a ton of community posts. So sometimes if we are able to share your work, you may gain more followers out of that. The biggest thing for me though is authenticity. So while we want to grow that audience, I'm more concerned about putting really great images on there, telling great stories, and trying to be consistent, which honestly the past couple of months has been hard. When you're normally creating photos of people or traveling, you have that constant flow of images to work with and share. But when you're sheltering at home, you don't as much. The one other tip that I will add is to talk to other people. Follow photographers who inspire you, follow creatives who inspire you, comment on their photos, engage in conversations with people. Once you start doing that, those people are going to come to your feed and hopefully engage on your photos and follow you back. So that's another approach that I would consider. With that topic in mind, John, do you have a couple of other tips that you'd want to share?
No, I have more questions than tips. Have you considered multiple accounts to do the travel stuff separately than the portraits? And
I have.
do you use it? And do you use a scheduling program for your posts?
I do. Those are good questions. I actually have been using a program called Hootsuite for a long time. Actually, back in the day when I used to help Creative Live, one of the things I did there was social media, and so I started using Hootsuite way back in the day. There's a lot of planning apps now. There's actually one called Plan that you can use, which will give you a visual flow of what you want to schedule. Scheduling can help you a lot because you could actually sit down, look through your images, and pick images, and then just create those posts and have them ready to go out and automatically, which is really helpful. Especially if you have kids running around or you're working 40 hours a week at a full-time job. So that's definitely a thing to consider. The other question was about multiple accounts. So I do actually have 2 accounts. I have my main account, which is just my name, Kate Hailey. That is where I have most of my followers. And they are all over the place. They're in different parts of the world. And many of them came from a lot of the mobile photography I did. I talked about doing photo a day projects, and so I posted a lot of those photos on my phone years and years ago. And I've done workshops on mobile photography and that kind of thing. So that is where I've grown the most audience. A couple of years ago, though, when I felt like I wanted to focus my main feed on the work that I wanted to be hired for, and I'll say that again, I'm focusing my main feed on the work that I want people to hire me for, I did start a second account, and originally it was called Kate Hailey BTS, so behind the scenes. And that was where I would post the sillier stuff, you know, photos of my dinner, behind the scenes shots from a shoot, or travel photos that were fun, but maybe not like my best work. And then a year ago or so, I changed that to called Headshots by Kate. So now I have a headshot specific account, which still gives me the flexibility to post more of the editorial portraits I do on my main account, and then some of the travel stuff. So I do have 2 accounts. I'm bad at posting at both of them. I also haven't done any headshots for 3 months. So I didn't want to populate too many shots from these same sessions. So I've been just, you know, it's out there. People can find me. They link to my website. And yeah, I mean, if you're worried about the consistency of the feed, then having a second account can be beneficial. John, I know that you have a couple, and I think you have some of that separation in there as well, as far as the content that maybe goes on one that doesn't go on the other. And then I'll add to that, what I've really been doing more of lately is using Instagram stories to share some of the day-to-day stuff that I want to still share, but might not be an image that, you know, I'm gonna post, which sounds super like, why are you thinking so much about what you're gonna post? But what I see in feeds that grow really big is consistency, consistent look, consistent work. And I'm really trying to, a lot of people use their Instagram as kind of a mini portfolio site. I have a website, people can go to my website and see my work. But with a focused Instagram feed, people can get a sense of who I am, and with more up-to-date work too. So using the Instagram stories is a way to share like the day-to-day stuff that might not be as interesting, but still fun. So hopefully that helps. Do you have any other question for me, John?
No, the last thing for me is to just tell people, I just posted on YouTube this morning a piece about grip equipment, like this tilter bracket for the flash and the like. So if you, my my YouTube, I think is Jay Cornice, Jcornice, and I've got a
link to
bunch of
that in the little
educational
chat room,
stuff
John?
there. What's that?
Do you want to put a link to your YouTube channel in the chat room?
I don't even know what the link is. We just look up Cornicello, Cornicello. I don't have a browser running on this computer at this second. Let me get into the chat here, though. I can go ahead and
while you're looking
speak
for
among
that,
yourselves. Yeah.
I'm going to ask one last question. So coming from our Facebook feed, do you recommend adding a signature on the photos you post to social media? And John and I have two different ways of doing this. I have gone through times where I put my name on my photos, or I put katehailey.com on the photos. I don't actually do that anymore. For me, it's not been a priority. It's going out to my accounts. It's a super low res photo typically. So I don't actually put like a signature or a copyright sign on my photos anymore. But John has his logo, which is an awesome logo. And I'm pretty sure, John, you put a logo on yours before you post them, don't you?
I used to, but
Okay.
about a year ago, I pretty much stopped.
Okay. So why did you stop?
I just didn't think it looked good anymore. I don't know, it just didn't feel like it was needed.
Okay.
Hopefully people recognize what I'm
Yeah.
doing.
I mean, I think if you do feel like you want to put your name on the photo, lower the opacity of the text, make it on the left or the right side, and be consistent with it. I've seen people post like a signature smack dab in the middle of a shot, and that's taking away from people experiencing that image. So to me, that's not beneficial. So people are finding your work through your Instagram or your Facebook or wherever. So it's totally up to you if you want to do that. So, okay, I want to thank everybody for your time today and joining us. John, thank you so much for being on here with me.
Sure,
I know it was
thank
super
you for
last
asking.
minute, so I appreciate you getting back to me. It's just also nice to have somebody to talk to during these sessions. But I just want to thank all of you guys for tuning in today. We appreciate your time. If you tune in this weekend, glazersphotofest.com is the website. If you go to just our website, glazerscamera.com, you'll be able to find the link right there to our PhotoFest event. Register for those sessions. Everything's free. It's going to be really fun. We have a lot of great content over those 8 days. You don't have to watch it all, but you can.
Is it being recorded?
Just a reminder, there will be some special offers available for those who register. So registration is super, super important, okay? John, did you have one last comment? I'm sorry.
I was asking if they're being recorded.
Many of them will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel post PhotoFest.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we can't record them all, but many of them are going to be available for people to watch later. So yes.
Great.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again, John. And we'll see you.
Thank
You guys
you all.
join us again on Saturday. Saturday, June 13th, PhotoFest goes live.